Welcome to Durham Creative Voices Rising. I am Antonio Alaniz, your host and a visual artist from Durham, North Carolina. Join us as we explore the intersection of art, healing, and community rebuilding efforts in 2024 amidst the challenges of COVID 19 and its aftermath. This podcast explores the role of the arts in public health and how creativity can promote wellness and equity for people in Durham and North Carolina. Let's envision a brighter future for everyone, with artists leading one of the many ways toward innovative solutions in a world of possibility. Peter.
To me.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. I am Antonio Alaniz. I am your host and a visual artist from Durham. Today, we are in our interview on the Durham Creative Voices Rising, and we have the amazing, the multi-talented Quay Weston, who is a good friend of mine who I met when the pandemic was happening, and I'm very happy to welcome you, Quay, to this Durham Creative Voices Rising podcast. And I really wanted to take the time to talk a lot about how you, as a writer, someone who is a designer, is using your art in a way to get us closer to a future that I know you explore a lot through a lot of your projects and your design. So, one of my first questions is well, before I even start asking you a question, I just want to welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonio. I'm very excited to talk with you. As you know, always, anytime I see you, I'm like, oh, Antonio, let's talk. So yeah, glad to be here and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Quay. So, as you know, the podcast is delving into how artists like yourself um, understand your role as a creative and as a visionary, and how we can inform essentially public health, right? COVID happened, a lot of things happened, and I wanted to really contextualize this to for the listeners. How did you start into the writing? Take us to the very first time that you started writing and how that has evolved over the years, pre-COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. So interestingly, I've been writing pretty much all of my life. But I started at like 9 years old. That's when I started to write music. I used to rap. That was my genre of choice. But really loved writing songs and writing music just over time, being from a very small, like a rural town in Eastern North Carolina. I needed some creative outlet. So music was my choice. But from there, I started to find interest in like short story writing in like high school. And then throughout college, I started to do more poetry. There were like spoken word groups on campus that I followed, but I didn't really perform the pieces I would write. I just kind of wrote it for my own creative practice. And then during college, I started to put out more music and actually think seriously about maybe being a rapper as a career option. So I started to do performances around Greensboro. That's where I went to school. And then beyond that, started to travel a bit and open for like bigger artists at that time. Um, so writing was always a part of my kind of like way of engaging the world and also like trying to express where I was and what was happening around me at a particular moment in time, which I think is why I love music so much and what music does for us, right? Um, Kind of like a soundtrack to all of our lives in different ways. So that was my kind of initial entry point to writing and creative writing. But once I started to find that the poems I wrote, people really enjoyed, I just started to try different things. So I would do like haikus, which was a part of this like new post-COVID version of my writing, which I had never really explored. But it felt like really brilliant to say, how can I say a lot in 575s? Like, how's that? Just testing myself kind of. So yeah, pre-COVID, I really was into music, poetry, and then like spoken word performances, which is where my writing kind of evolved from into now, which led into writing the book, and then a few other things from there. So that's kind of the trajectory up until now.
I get a sense that you use the arts, specifically music, poetry, to make sense of your world. Is
Mm.
that right? Can you
That is
walk us
absolutely
through
right.
can you walk us through how you use the art as a tool to distill the things you were going through, just
Mm.
experiences?
Yeah, so I think I was always I also really liked to read when I was younger. It's not really the case now. Like I'll read stuff, but I'm not as avid a reader as I used to be. Um, but I think for me, again, being from like a really small town, I didn't really have many spaces. Like there weren't these like, arts programs or art schools or those sorts of things for us there. Um, so I spent a lot of my time trying to really just like process things through my writing, which is where my music came from, which is a lot about like what was happening around me, what was happening with family, what I aspired to, what things I really wanted to do in my life. So a lot of the songs I wrote, young me, were very like aspirational about the things I thought I wanted, right? Whether I seen them on TV or heard about them from a friend. That was just a part of kind of how I processed that. But then when I got into college, that's where poetry kind of shifted it from me. In that poetry feels more like present. It can be very historical, which, right? We have poets of all times that have always been around, but that felt more like a practice of kind of like describing a thing as I was in it, more than music necessarily did. You didn't have to rhyme. You didn't have to like, yeah, it didn't have to be all kind of thought out and precise. Um, so yeah, part of this process, like growing up, aging, like graduating and getting out and going into a world where there weren't many jobs available once I graduated in 2013. So like, what do I do? Um, and really like processing grief, processing sadness and like disappointment, frustration with all of the things that happen like politically and socially and culturally. Um, Poetry, music gave me kind of all of those ways to process those things, and even how I use my writing, be it in my Instagram stories, if you're familiar with, or in articles and other things that help to kind of like pull out some of the tensions as well as like some of the joys as they come.
Thank you, Quay. I get a sense that the arts were crucial in understanding your world
Yep.
back then. One of the parts of this podcast is really to help us understand how artists use their craft to imagine and also process. But before we even get to the imagining or the future,
Mm-hmm.
um, what advice do you have for artists that may be, or even people who may not think of themselves as artists now? Um, what advice would you tell them in terms of how to begin expressing or how to begin exploring this part of their creative or creativity?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the part about people who don't see themselves as creative or artists. And I personally believe that all of us have some creative capacity, whether it's like the more abstract-ish art that's like, you know, the big things that people associate with art, right? So like murals and galleries and exhibitions, right? Like that is like a very kind of it's already like a system of things versus someone who just like writes poems because they feel like writing poems today, right? And I think or people who do like very formal things, right? Process management, people who manage teams, right? Like there's a creative aspect to all the work that we do in which you have to think and imagine like what could a thing be, right? Or how can I make it better? That's a creative question to me. So I think, yeah, I would say short version is like the thing that you feel drawn to try. I advocate and encourage everyone to try, be it writing, be it painting, be it sketching. Um, Interviewing people is an art form, right? That I think people forget. um, Communication is an art form. So yeah, my advice is really to like try the thing, even if you're not good at it, and even if you don't want to sell it, still try the thing, right? Because I think also there's this idea that being creative or being an artist has to mean that you like then make money from the thing, which is sure, right? At some point, maybe that's what you want to do, but it's really about like practicing the thing to a point that you feel like confident in it as well as like maybe I figured this out, maybe this is good, but really just like a process of improvement. So I would say in whatever form you're drawn to, as well as like however you want to um, share it, or I would say to start, but then also like set a time for yourself. Is it a month? You'll do this thing every day. Is it a week? You'll try this thing every day. And I think that at least helps to bring out some of the inspirations.
Thank you. So you mentioned a lot about process, structure, and also, in a way, you mentioned confidence, right?
Yeah, because like I I was 9 when I started writing songs, and the songs were terrible. Like they were the worst. Like I didn't have what was I talking about? I don't know, right? Like if I go back and listen, I'll probably be like, "Wow, that was really bad." But it was just like the joy of expressing the things that like felt the best, and even family and relatives who were like, "Oh yeah, this is so great." It wasn't really that good, right? But I think the appreciation for the kid taking out time and writing things and making them rhyme and like being expressive and emotive about it and finding music and putting it on top of the vocals and then like arranging things like that part of it felt I think like a lot to appreciate for people rather than like just the words I was saying. So I think yeah, in that there's just the piece of expression that like helps us to feel balanced, to process, to like move through a thing, to get the energy out. That's really important, and I think it really creates like a balanced life for many people.
Thank you for sharing that sense
Yeah.
of vulnerability, because I think that as professionals, sometimes we forget to acknowledge where we started and how the beginning of our work was developing, and it wasn't as great as it could be because we
Mhm.
all start from somewhere, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I thank you for sharing that. I
Yeah.
always like to show that the duality of work.
Hmm.
And not everything is always 100%.
That's right.
Sometimes we're going to be showing up 20%, 10%,
That's right.
5%, but
Yep.
that's okay.
Yep.
We're still showing up.
Yep. That's right. And yeah, like that's the part I think feels most relevant right now as I'm like trying to figure out what is the next creative thing I want to do. Right. Like I'm figuring out, but I also realize that I don't have to do it like it doesn't have to be my best thing and it doesn't have to be the most imaginative thing. It might just be like writing 2 sentences today of some like imaginary fiction piece. Right. But I think, yeah, it doesn't have to be 100%. And I think that's some pressure we put on ourselves as artists and people who feel like they aren't artists to have some like very tight, perfect thing that's ready to share. And yeah, part of that is also like allowing people to consume it or give feedback on it to improve it even um, at whatever form it might be. So yeah, you're right.
Thank you, Quay. I appreciate that. I want to fast forward a little bit more. You
Hmm.
mentioned college,
Hmm.
and then I want to touch on the COVID-19 pandemic. As
Hmm.
this project is really about exploring the impact about COVID on
Hmm.
artists and how we can imagine a bigger, a brighter world for people. I was wondering, did you have any of these deep thoughts during the COVID-19 pandemic, during lockdown? How did that impact your art or your music, your poetry, or your writing?
Yeah. Ooh, it was a lot. I had actually just started a new job in February of 2020, like a week before the full kind of like statewide lockdowns, shutdowns. Um, I'm never sure what to call that time period, but like shelter in place, they called it a lot. Um, and I had, yeah, just started a new gig doing a design. It was a design job, um, working with like government, which was a whole nother conversation now. Yeah. But from that, I think my own practice was impacted because I had started to have some ideas around writing a book, which I eventually did. That was supposed to be about like my town, Pantego, North Carolina. And so I had kind of had like these imaginations around it. What could it be? How could I write it? What would I write it about? Who would I include? And then my great grandma passed away in say April, May. I think it was April. Yeah, but her health was on the decline early in the pandemic, and we knew um, we wouldn't have much time with her. So I think all the ideas I have for what I was going to write was like, oh, okay, whatever. I'll leave that. This is more important. But even up to the point that she passed away, there were so many elders in my hometown that were passing away from COVID. My partner's uncle was like one of the first people we knew that had it and passed away from it. Um, and my grandmother didn't pass from COVID, but like surrounding towns, there were all these people. I would talk to my other grandma every day, and she would be like, "Yeah, this person, her friends, and some of her classmates, right?" And just like feeling um, the loss of that, while also not being able, or not being able, not feeling comfortable traveling home, sitting with elders. A lot of my family members are older. So like I was like, it seems like this virus is really impacting older people. Like we don't want to go take it or so it was just all those questions, right? We didn't have the whole like vaccinations. That wasn't a thing like yet, right? We were in the very beginning of it. Um, we were also planning a wedding for that summer. So like all these different pieces were happening. Um, and yeah, for a moment I kind of put the writing idea on the back shelf um, until we could figure out what would happen with family. And then once my grandma passed away, my great grandmother passed away, um, I decided that the book would be about her or like a tribute to her, um, as well as like telling stories of my hometown because there was both like the grief of the loss, but then also like feeling disconnected from home because I wasn't traveling there very often. Um, so yeah, it really kind of put a pause on this other idea I had, which was similar about writing about home, but in a much bigger way. Um, once the pandemic started, and then like just the series of changes every week, and like, oh, this week you can gather with 100 people, and this week 50 people, and next week 25 people, and I'm just like watching these updates, like, whew, what are we supposed to do? And, I want to see my friends. I want to like hang out. Stuff is closed. Favorite restaurants are closed. Like, what are we supposed to do? So there's a lot of big questions, but ultimately, later in the year, I started to write that book about home. Once some of those kind of initial waves of loss and things kind of passed through me. Yeah. It's a big impact for sure.
So the pandemic um, shifted your focus on a specific project, right? And in this project, can you tell us more about what it's called? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. The project is called Yonda, and it's a series of things. What first came out of the project was a book that I wrote and self-published um, that was about like my memories of home, um, family stories, but all centered around the place that I grew up. And in that book, there's also like a past, present, future theme where in the past, I'm again recounting those stories that I remember as a child. The present theme is more like my current thoughts and reflections on like the state of the world, the state of community, politics, like masculinity, all these big questions that were coming up during COVID when we all had to sit with ourselves for a while. Um, and then in the end, there were like more futuristic focused poems, more like imagining of like what could the world look like on far, 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 far away from now. Um, what can we imagine, um, like liberation to look like freedom to look like for people. Um, so that book was kind of like a big kind of draw on all those things. Um, and then from there continued into evolving into a podcast and then having some other ideas around like an illustrated series, but that didn't happen. That was also part of that first idea. um, but yeah, some of those things that I wanted to gather with people to do had to be like, okay, let's not do that right now because I'm not sure how this gathering thing is supposed to work. But the project still happened, the book still happened. It was just more of a delay, and a shift in the priority and like focus of the writing.
Thank you, Quay, for that. And I want
Mm-hmm.
to quote a couple of lines from your Yanda book that I was able to look over. Um,
Mm-hmm.
One is you say, and I quote, "I have come to realize that Yanda, similar to but different from heaven, is mostly a narrative of a world, place, space where there are no barriers, bounds, or burdens."
Mm-hmm. Thank you
That
for
was
reading that.
that was very deep when I was reading it,
Yeah,
and I just
yeah.
want to thank you so much for telling us how you've used your writing to help us imagine that world.
Mm-hmm.
How can we imagine that world in this second half of the podcast? This is how you can
Mm-hmm.
take the conversation, particularly around COVID. How can we
Mm-hmm.
use, what does this world look like to you? And how can we get
Mm-hmm.
there through the arts?
Yeah, I imagine I think at the base, at the root of kind of what the pandemic taught me, maybe taught us, but definitely taught me, um, as a person and an artist, was that like time is an illusion. Like we tend to think there's a lot more time than we actually have. We tend to think we have more time with people than we might actually have. We tend to um, think that there's time to like put a thing off, like a big kind of yeah, to put a thing off to like next week, next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I get to it, right? And then I think there's also the part of it that taught me that we need a lot of transformation in our communities, um, to ensure things as simple as testing locations are available to us. And what are the what are the relationships and conversations we have to have, um, to quell like misinformation about vaccinations, and like all the conversations I had with family members who may have been like deeply religious or like, um, hearing different things or reading different things online to say like, well, I'm not, even if it's in their best interest to be vaccinated, right? Like all the conspiracy things that we heard, like, oh, this came along too quick. Oh, this is, yeah. So I think that is something I learned. But I think in that imagining, I feel like what that world looks like is people having healthcare that's not tied to their employment. A lot of people lost jobs. A lot of people were laid off. A lot of people were sick at work, but still having to work, right? So I'm thinking about like, um, how we get to a place where people are taken care of. Um, Imagining a world where people have access to like fresh foods that they need to keep their bodies well. Thinking of a world where we can, trust that even if, um, things get really difficult and scary, that people will have our backs. We would be able to, um, travel to places and not worry about, um, someone uh, someone thinking we're strange for wearing a mask to protect ourselves and others, right? Like I'm thinking of just like those social shifts that need to occur in order for us to be in relationship with one another that then allows us to not only be taken care of, but take care of each other. And I think that's the world that I'm really imagining on the other side of COVID. And even when we jump back into this world, right? Like getting back to how it was or what things were. And I think there's this we've neglected to really I think have deep conversations about like what we lost in that time and like how we rushed back to something that may not necessarily be serving us well. Um, and how we uh and how many of us were really dealing with like shifts from being isolated for so long. Um, and I'm still trying to figure out like how to enter and exit a conversation right now. I lost some of those like basic social skills. Um, and I think, yeah, I'm imagining a world where we're taken care of, where we take care of each other, where our like elders aren't as vulnerable as they are, where Black and Brown communities aren't as vulnerable as they are, where people can um, access healthcare, where people can be vaccinated and not be concerned about chips or whatever people were saying are in them, and like where information is like free flowing and people can um, agree or disagree, but not make it about people being good or bad, right? Mm, Yeah, I really want that for us. And not only that, but even during COVID, there were so many like police killings, there were so many like um riots and rallies and all kinds of things from people being brutalized by different forms of the state. And I think that was really alarming too, right on top of this pandemic thing. So, yeah, I feel like there's just a lot of change that I want to see and wish to see. And the arts could really be a tool for like building counter narratives, telling the proper stories, sharing truths, um, holding and hosting and facilitating conversations, right? Where people disagree, finding points of unity, helping us to recount and like process and grieve through like movement or sound or visuals or pictures. Um, yeah, there's a lot in there that I think needs to happen that art would really be a vehicle for. Um, and I wonder, I know a lot of things are happening, but those are some of the things I'm thinking about right now.
Thank you, Quay. You gave a
Mhm.
super deep answer, and I could go in and expand on
Yeah.
most every sentence you gave.
Mhm.
And thank you for giving us a summary of how you believe the arts can get us closer to that. You said a beautiful list of things the last few minutes how we can get to that. Um, do you and also and I also saw some sort of discomfort in your in tone of voice. Do you believe that there's more for us to in terms of how much other systems can help us as artists get to that? Because as artists, we have a lot of resources, at least the ones that I'm able to see. And speaking for experience here in Durham. Do you believe that we're getting there? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think we're getting there in resources for artists, right? Like there's different offices within Durham, both city and county, who are supporting and lending resources to, for example, um, the strategic planning around our like cultural roadmap piece, right? That's a really huge part of the visioning and involving artists, talking about ways to support artists and make sure artists are resourced. There's like the federal dollars from like ARPA programs for American Recovery Plan, I think so, that are being used to fund different artist endeavors, right? And I think that's happening. I think efforts around affordable housing locally will be able to help that, um, at least in ensuring artists can live okay and well here, um, potentially. And then there's yeah, I think there's also all of the arts organizations locally who are supporting like independent artists, providing grants, providing resources, providing these projects, supporting artist development. So there's a lot happening for sure. Um, I think the one thing, if I can say, would really get us going is I absolutely, and I don't know how it happens. I haven't really dug into the research, but I think what's really important is like ensuring when we talked about health and wellness, right, for everyday residents, be it especially around like healthcare. Yes, North Carolina has expanded like Medicaid options, which I think helps lots of folks. But I'm also thinking about like how there can be some initiative to ensure that artists, independent artists, can also have some sort of affordable healthcare options. Because in order to live, you want to be taken care of, and like choosing to have a career in art, if that's what you want to do full time, means that then if insurance is tied to employment, oftentimes, then people who aren't employed typically either forego having insurance coverage or find another option that may be a little bit too expensive. So I'm wondering, like, if within that there's a way to support artists, like basic needs, to ensure that people can be taken care of while they're like trying to and are like building and continuing a art career. So that's like one thing I would love to see in whatever form it existed. So yeah, yeah, yeah. But I definitely think we're heading there. I think we're getting there for sure.
Thank you, Quay. That was an amazing summary. I myself have not seen this level of investment in creative and cultural work anywhere else. I don't know if it's because I live in Durham, but I like to read, and I never see these kind of
Yep.
initiatives anywhere. So I'm very, very
Yeah.
happy to live in a city, in a county that really is taking the right direction, caring about us.
That's right. That's right.
In fact, we met in one of these programs, right? We met in the
That's right.
public art.
That's right. In the public art class. Yeah. In that course. Yeah.
Yes,
That's
we
right.
met
That's right.
through amazing nonprofits in the city of Durham. Um, so happy to have met you there. We were working on public art and how to create essential um, cultural work that would help us and allow us to get to a next level or our next goal in our professional careers.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of connections made, lots of folks. I was like, oh, I've seen their stuff, but I hadn't met them in real life. So that was yeah, and
That's
just to
awesome.
like know that there's the artist community, and like people you can reach out to with like opportunities or like just basic connections, I think is like super helpful. And what's helpful for me as like a person who is thinking about ways to use art as like my ultimate career and maybe not one day have like another gig and other contracts and all these other things that I'm trying to balance. Yeah, so knowing it's possible is also encouraging.
Thank you, Quay. One of the things I like about Durham and the creative community, the cultural workers, are that we do things and we take initiative. The public art class that we took together is only one example. One other example that we also worked again in the marketing was through
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Durham Art Parade,
That's right. That's right. Yep. 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 Hmm.
which was a beautiful way for us coming together and dreaming collectively, right? When we all had the opportunity to plan and also to just analyze how everything went after the art parade, it was a magical opportunity for us to learn about what happened and how transformational of an experience it was coming together and create something from the very beginning.
Yes.
And and I'm so happy I worked with this other group of art innocent and amazing culture organizers. So
Yeah. They're dope. They're dope. They're doing good stuff, and they actually, I'm in it now, formally. Um. So yeah, it's been a joy. Yeah, it's just been a joy. I think there's a lot of good work coming out of that group for sure.
Yes, I like that. And I just like how fast everything is happening and how everyone collectively is creating this change of things that have not happened, or at least that I know have not happened, to make them happen, right?
Yep, 100%.
So, so in a way, we are creating a platform and a foundation for that future world, right? Of what we want to see.
Mhm.
Great, and
Yeah,
thank you for sharing your experience about how to create more healthy
yeah.
artists, accessing healthcare opportunities as well. Um, I know that we talked a lot about COVID and how that impacted you and how you responded. Are there any lessons that you are learning right now from COVID as we are building and rebuilding from this health crisis?
Mm. Lessons. I feel like I shared a good bit of things earlier, but I wonder, I think one of the lessons is, which I didn't know at first, was um, how much of a impact it had on like city and local and state level like economies, and like how many resources were, without people traveling to states and traveling to cities and staying for festivals and staying for concerts, like how much revenue that generates each year. And I think that's something that I'm learning a lot about. And then obviously that revenue is dispersed out to different programs and different groups and different organizations. Um, so I think that's a lesson I'm learning. Like I think there was like the personal collective kind of slowdown, but I think I didn't typically think about like, oh, what does that mean for the city? What does that mean for the county? What does it mean for the state? And how that can change quickly, um, with just a, well, not, it's, I don't think the pandemic's over quite yet, but like the ripples of it are still here for sure. Um, yeah, and I think, yeah, things can change really quickly. But I do feel that people are still like trying to um, manage the resources they have access to, also still supporting the causes that are really important to them. And I think also like the advocacy to ensure from within the city that the dollars and budgets are dispersed to the things that people really care about is extremely important, and a part of some of the work both Arnie Anderson is doing and also some of the efforts I'm supporting in different ways around like even Durham's like city budget, right? And then like the cultural roadmap obviously been another piece of that, and like coming up with proposals and things with that group. So yeah, lots of lessons around that, but also like in that knowing and learning, like we just need to speak and gather and organize ourselves well to ensure that the city and county knows like these are where our priorities are as well. So as you're like planning for next year's budgets or whatever, these are things we want to fund and invest in. And I think that's helped a lot too.
Thank you, Quay, for that. Can you provide some advice for people looking to engage in cultural organizing work, like the one that you mentioned?
Yeah. So I think the main thing is there's many opportunities and ways to get involved, right? Be it volunteering with the arts organization. I think from there, making those relationships, you begin to learn through conversations like what things are important, and also like what things different organizations are focused on. So in my case, I'm interested in um, workers' wellness and survival and sustenance here in Durham, right? So like supporting groups that are advocating for like fair pay for workers, city workers, particularly right now is the current topic. Um, there's and in that, through making those connections, you begin to run into more groups who are interested in, say, like other forms of investment, like the heart program or budget for arts programming. So I think for people who are interested in cultural organizing, you don't have to organize people, but you do have to think about relationships and building relationships and just asking questions, and being curious about like what other people are organizing around or working on. And there's like not on group here. There's so many groups doing so many things. Yeah, and I think once you plug into them, go to their events, talk to people, message them on Instagram, what people do, email them. you start to you start to hear about a lot of opportunities to engage, and I think that's a starting point. It doesn't have to be like a big thing that you plan or organize people yourself because people are already doing it.
Right. So the first step is reaching out.
That's right. That's right. And
Um,
people are far more eager to talk about what they're doing than I think we think sometimes. So yeah, yeah.
Sounds great. Great. Thank you. One question that I like to also ask before we conclude the
Mhm.
next few minutes: what do you wish systems could do to support your art as a creative? Are there any like top three things that you wish you had?
Top three things. I would like more unrestricted funding that doesn't have to be attached to a particular outcome for individual artists or independent artists. That's like one big thing that feels important because often, you know, you apply to a thing and it has to be like specific output. And I think in that creativity, allowing people to output something that doesn't have to be specific is um, helpful and useful. I think another thing, what's another thing? Unrestricted funding, more like, I think more collaborative arts processes where not just one artist applies for a thing, but like several independent artists apply for things and like they're grouped on a large project. I think could be useful both for like um, the connections, the networking, as well as like kind of skill sharing. In that, like I may be really good at design and graphics and writing, right? And Antonio, you're skilled at many things, illustrating, interviewing, podcasting, painting, like all of those things. And I think creating opportunities for different people from different kind of mediums to collaborate would be useful, like cohorts of artists. That would be incredible. Um, and then third, I think one thing that would be especially helpful for me is like some of that development work. Like there are grants for artist development I've seen across the state, right, and across the country. But I think there's like a need to understand beyond like applying for a thing, um, getting the funds and then completing the thing, like how um, better ways to demonstrate like skills and capabilities. Are there like fellowships and residencies that would be useful for me specifically in my medium, in my style, in my form? Um, are there ways for me to, or artists to develop a curriculum of learning in a specific art form, right? Um, that isn't bound into like a specific arts organization, but allows artists to then like bring in other people, young people, especially. I'm thinking about a lot. You did some incredible work with young people recently at the library, right? Like that type of thing. Like, how do we engage youth more? Because that's also a gap here in Durham. By funding the artists to then decide what that platform and product looks like, I think would be really helpful too in my form of work as I'm like learning, growing, and not necessarily looking for a adult audience in like all of my things, but like also interested in educating and teaching and training too. So yeah, those are the kind of things that come to mind.
Thank you, Quay. So now we learn from Quay directly
Mm-hmm.
what's important for him to feel supported and get to the next level of his career as an artist. So Quay, we're almost concluding the episode. Is there
Mm.
something you'd like to share that I didn't ask you, and something that maybe we didn't include before?
Uh, Not really. I did just want to share, like, I mentioned Yonda and what that was in the book. But the second or kind of second and third part of that is art. archive work, which is something that I'm starting to get my hands in through like different family artifacts and things that my elders are giving me over time. Pictures, Bibles, photos, things I'm finding within those. So the Yonder Project is where everything lives. But just wanted to share that that is a part of the work too, is this ongoing like land preservation work with my family, to preserve like 35 acres of land out east. And as a part of that creative practice, it's like trying to piece together some of the history to then share with other family members so that we'll, hopefully see the importance and value and reason, uh, to preserve the land in whatever form that might take. So just wanted to share a little bit about the Yonder Project, like where it is now, and kind of what the focus is for it, in case folks are like, oh, what happened after the book? Because I mentioned there are some parts, but didn't say what they were. So that's it.
Great. So people can learn more through all the work that you're doing through your book, through your podcast, through your website.
Right.
Can you tell us where this website is?
That's right. It is yondaproject.com. That's YONDA project.com. And my Instagram is exactly the same. It's Yonder Project on Instagram. That's my Instagram, but still related to that same work. And that's it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Quay, for this time that we've spent. I learned a lot
Yeah.
from you as an artist, and I want to thank you so much for the opportunity that you joined us. Again, please find a Quay and Quay's work at yonderproject.com. And again, Quay, I wish you the best these upcoming years, and I can't wait to see where your craft takes you, your music, your poetry, your writing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Antonio. You're brilliant. So thanks.
This Durham Creative Voices Rising episode is proudly supported by Bull City Strong and its Say Something Strong project. Bull City Strong is a community based partnership aimed at reducing the increased risk of COVID 19 among historically marginalized populations in Durham County, including Black and Hispanic communities. This podcast is brought to you by Antonio Alanis Art, where we are dedicated to amplifying artists' voices and fostering wellness within our community through the arts. Here are 4 ways that you can show your support. Join the conversation in your community on how the arts can create a healthier and more equitable world for everyone. Leave a review of this podcast wherever you listen to it. Share this episode with other artists and community leaders who believe that the arts are crucial to moving forward in a world with COVID-19. Visit the Bull City Strong Durham page at the Durham County Department of Public Health and explore Antonio Alanis Art website at antonioalanisart.com. Thank you for your support.